Hello, my name is Teresa and this is my week 7 of the 100 Days of Making Comics challenge. This week I've been editing my comic, and so in this video you're going to see me editing my comic in the footage while I talk about editing for comics. I hope you enjoy it and you find it useful. So first of all, what is my experience? Who are you listening to? So I worked for a couple of years in a comics magazine, a digital comics magazine called Saturday AM. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. And I was an editor for several series there. And it was a lot of fun. And also I have a degree in English, but that's all my experience in comics and comic editing. I'm not a professional editor. I've only worked in a digital magazine. So I have experience, but I don't have all the answers. But I still hope that my tips and my experience will be useful to you. However, if there's one tip that I want you to take away from this, it's a meta tip, which is be careful who you listen to. It is okay and it is a good thing to listen to critique and editing tips, but not everyone on the internet that has an opinion is necessarily an expert on editing or shares a vision for your project. So if there's one super important tip that overarches every other tip, is that having an editor doesn't mean that you turn off your critical thinking and your creative vision. It means that you're collaborating with someone in order to create a product that readers will enjoy. So yeah, find that balance between listening to your editor and listening to your creative vision, because it is in that balance that great work comes from. Having said that, I'm gonna start with the 5 most common problems that comic artists have in my experience as an outside editor. I have these problems myself sometimes, but not all of them, but these are the 5 that I found most common. So number 1 problem is deadlines. People have a tremendous amount of problems when it comes to deadlines for 2 reasons. Number 1, they don't understand how long it takes to make a comic page. They create deadlines that are unrealistic, and this creates a hell of a lot of frustration, and many a times I've seen people even quit their comic because they don't understand that it's not that they're not good enough, it's just that they don't know how long a comic takes, and it takes a long time, I'm gonna tell you that. The other day one of my friends shared a post from Twitter where a professional penciler said that a panel may take between 1 to 4 hours, and that's one panel. And I've seen people creating deadlines. I was like, okay, so I have 4 hours Saturday morning, so I'm gonna create 2 pages, and I would be like, whoa, that's not gonna happen. Unless you are creating like very simple stick figure type comic, it's not gonna happen. 1 hour is not enough for a page if you're starting or if you have a commercial style. Number 2 reason why people have problems with deadlines is because they don't understand how much time they have in their lives. And this may sound ridiculous, but this is one of the most common ones. Like, people would say like, oh yeah, I have all day Saturday, I have all day Sunday, and this would be like this is something that happened really. Like, in reality, it was the 23rd of December, and I was asking this person, don't you have to buy presents? Didn't you tell me that you haven't bought any of the presents? Like, oh, yeah, right. Okay, so on the 23rd I have to go. And then he started like going through all the things he actually had to do in his life. And he realized that all that free time that he had told me he had didn't exist. So time management and realizing what are your responsibilities, how long do your responsibilities take, etc., is one of the reasons why people don't deal well with deadlines, is because they don't understand just how little time you have in your life when you are working or studying full-time or you have other responsibilities. If you don't have a 40-hour work week to devote to your comics, chances are you're going to be scratching time away from God knows where, to be honest. Probably from resting most of the times, or from watching TV or other things like that. But that time is time you have to make. It's not time that exists. The second one that is quite big is typos and grammar. Even if you're a grammar whiz, you are bound to put a couple of typos in there, even if you do know the grammar rules. And the thing is that most people become blind to their own typing mistakes. You just stare at the screen and you think you are reading what you're reading, but you're not, and you become completely oblivious to your own typos and your own grammar mistakes. So even if you think it looks perfect, run it through somebody else. And I've classed these two problems, the deadlines, the typos and grammar mistakes, in one cluster, which is solved by one thing. There is one way to solve these two problems. Is to have a buddy or an editing buddy. A lot of you and a lot of us, many people don't have money to hire a professional editor. And so if your problem is only with deadlines and typos, I wouldn't recommend getting an editor just for that. For these cases, I recommend a buddy, someone that will hold you accountable. I have a couple of people that I do that with. We just text each other. We say my deadline is this day and these are my thumbnails. They proofread for me, I proofread for them, and then we hand in the work on the day that we said we would. And that keeps us accountable, and also it helps us with the typos and grammar mistakes. Moving on to the number 3 most common problem that I found as an outside editor, which is impatience. Especially with people that really like action scenes, I found that they wanted to just jump into the action and in the cool battle, and they wanted to do that in chapter 1. And the reality of it is that you can't get to the cool part straight away. Maybe you can have a cool opening scene, but stories need to be built up. So unless you are just drawing a scene, if what you want to do is you want to tell a story, you need a certain build-up. You need to create a connection between the characters and the reader. You need to raise the stakes. You need to do a certain amount of things before getting into a cool battle where people will actually care about the result of the battle. So if you want your story to have an impact on your readers, you have to build things in a way that will make those battles meaningful. And this is not only true for battles, this is also true for, getting your two protagonists together. If it's a love story, they want the kiss straight away. It's like, no, you have to build the tension. Because if they kiss, the story is finished. If the battle is won, the story is finished. So, you are trying to rush to the end because it's the cool part, but you're not building it up. So it's not cool. It's just a random scene that nobody cares about, and you don't want that. So yeah, patience. Just be patient, build it up nicely, enjoy the parts that are not the cool parts, and just try to make every part of the story interesting and make the most out of all those parts, because everything is fun, even the light-hearted bonding scenes and all that stuff is good, can be good. Be patient, enjoy that. And I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to anybody that needs to hear this. Okay, number 4. The number 4 problem I saw all the time is the problems with character motivations and flaws. A lot of the times the writers would present this world that is very well built or this story that is thought out, but when it came to the characters, there was no reason why these characters would do any of these things. Because the fact of the matter is that most people, if they're comfortable and they're happy, they're not going to do anything. You have to find a strong enough motivation to get any human being to move and do cool stuff, because what we're normally prone to doing is nothing. And that's the main problem also with character motivation. Is like there is no way a person would do that if they don't have a strong reason to do it. So find a strong reason for your characters to do the cool stuff you want them to do. The second one is the flaws. And this is an interesting one because people are scared. People are scared of people not liking their character if it has flaws. And if you think about big characters in big commercial franchises, they're not necessarily likable. They just work as characters. The first thing that comes to mind when I say that is Naruto. If you think about a 12, 11-year-old that is painting things, defacing important historical monuments, that is shouting, screaming, just being obnoxious, that is not a very likable person. But as a character it works, and the fact that he has those flaws make it more interesting to follow the story, because he eventually becomes a leader and stuff, and he leaves behind that obnoxious, flawed character that he was at the beginning. Well, he lives it to a certain degree. Of course, he's the same person, but he becomes a more mature, less annoying character. And that's what's good about stories, is to see these flawed characters become better. If you create a perfect character, it's not as interesting, is it? Imagine that story with perfect characters. Like, let's look at these perfect characters living a perfect life. It's like, no, I don't think that's a very, I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't want to read that story, and that's why I find that not being willing to make your character a little bit unlikable is a mistake. And now, the final and fifth problem, the most common thing, and this I think happened to every single person, and I would include myself in that category, and is overachieving to the point of quitting. So when you're planning for a new project, there is a difference between planning and daydreaming. When you are planning for a project, what you want to be doing is you want to be creating a framework that is achievable, something that you can do. And if you're at a level where you're not happy with your work, then you shouldn't be shooting for your magnus opus and your greatest work ever. And this is what every single person I've ever encountered was trying to do. They wanted to do something that would take him to stardom straight away, without realizing that your first comic or your first few comics are going to be a learning experience, and that you shouldn't be aiming to impress or to gain accolades. You should be aiming to bettering yourself and doing the best you possibly can. And by doing that, the product that you're going to get is a lot better than the product you're going to get when you are trying to create that ideal work that you're not ready for. At least that's my point of view. This is what in teaching theory is called scaffolding, which is the idea that if you want a student to learn something difficult, you need to create a step-by-step journey for them. You can't just see a person that has no idea how to speak a language and put a dictionary in front of them and say, I want you to write a novel in this new language. That makes no sense. And that's what a lot of people I see trying to do with their first comic. They say, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to get these books that instruct me on how to make comics, and I'm going to make the best comic ever. The best anyone could ever make. And, you know, that's not how things tend to work in real life. Be a good teacher to yourself or be a good editor to yourself, and give yourself some realistic objectives. Something that is going to teach you something that is challenging enough so that you can get to the next level, but don't ask yourself to take a massive leap without the right amount of preparation. And now I would like to talk about my own self-editing, my personal problems as an editor of myself, because I edit for myself. I have my buddies, but I have to do it mostly myself. The things that I have to watch out for are, number one, avoiding repetition and redundancy. In this comic that I'm making for the anthology, I did something that I always do, which is I draw the panel and I write the caption and I write the dialogue, and I realize that the panel, the caption, and the drawing are giving exactly the same information. I'm just repeating the same information in 3 different spaces in the same panel. And I do this constantly, and I always have to watch myself. So there's this golden rule that people talk about, which is show, don't tell. I would say telling at times is good, but don't show and tell. That's a definite no-no. A caption in comics could add so much more meaning to what you're showing with your images. I remember in particular reading Ice Heaven by Daniel Klaus. He has this character that is very, he's just not very nice. And if you contrast what he's saying in his speech with what he's thinking in his thought bubbles, it's really funny to see that contrast. And that's something you can do in comics that is very effective. And I find also there was another comic by Chris Ware where he has a superhero saving someone from a fire. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a superhero saving somebody. And in the captions, you had the text explaining like his deepest trauma with his relationship with his dad. So he's like looking all heroic, and then the text is just showing you just how messed up he really is. And that juxtaposition of the text of his trauma with the heroic saving scene is fantastic. The interaction between text and image in comics can be so enriching, but my natural tendency is to have a character eating a cake and saying, this cake is good, which is, how does that help anybody? How does that add anything? I don't know, but I do it all the time. So repeating and being redundant is my number one problem. Number two problem that I have as a self-editor is that I always forget about having fun. Now, I'm not talking about having fun like dancing while I draw or anything like that. I'm talking about having fun with the interactions and the parts of the story that are not necessary. I always get into this mindset of, this is a plot moving device. This is something that is important. I need to reach this next plot point because I want the story to move forward. And I get so wrapped up in this mindset of moving the story forward and everything being relevant that I forget that sometimes it's just good to have your characters interacting, having fun, doing something stupid, maybe having a character fall on the floor just because, it's fun. Why not? And personally, I love when those things happen in a comic that I'm reading, when you just have those moments where characters are just having interactions and saying things. It's not gonna make your story move faster, but it's definitely gonna create a moment where, as a reader, you can connect with the world and the characters, and it's just nice. So yeah, don't forget about the fun. You should have fun, light-hearted moments that are not connected necessarily to the plot. And number three, I am always repeating the same shots and the same panel layouts. Always. I have these default panel layouts I always go for, and I always do these same perspective, same camera distance. I don't know how to call it, but like where you cut the character at the belly button. I always have characters like that. I hardly ever remember to put characters standing to place them in the scene. So yeah, that constant repetition of the same shot and the same layout. And one way I can stop myself from doing that is by having a printed version of Wally Wood's 21 panels in front of my desk. And every time I get into a rut of always repeating the same thing, I just look at it and go like, oh yeah, I can use shadows, or I can do this, I can do that. And it reminds me to try and think of different camera angles, positions, compositions, and just in general, just mix it up a little bit because it gets really repetitive. And that's it. Those are my tips for self-editing and editing your comics. One last thing that I would like to say is just be wary of self-censorship. I think sometimes we get scared and we edit ourselves too much, and at the end we end up not doing the stuff that is most authentic, to call it somehow. So be your editor, but don't censor yourself. That's my final top tip. Having said that, I'm gonna move on to my 100 days of making comics update, finally. So this week was tiring. I feel very tired, I'll be honest. It's always around I think tomorrow's day 50. Around day 50 is when I start feeling the drain from the challenge. And to anybody that's thinking of taking this challenge, I'll admit that it's quite taxing, because it's the constant focus. Like, today I have to do it, and the next day I have to do it, and it's having to do it every day that is really difficult. And you have to organize your day around it most of the times, especially at the weekends when I have events and things with family or friends, and I have to wake up early to do it. And it just, when you go to bed on a Saturday knowing that you have to wake up on a Sunday early to do something, it's just like such a bummer. I was like, oh, well, that happened last week. And yeah, but other than being tired, I have no problems whatsoever. And tomorrow I'm gonna start drawing. The preparation is finished and I'm really excited about it. So I hope for all of you doing the challenge, everything's going well. And next week I'm going to be talking about how to get better at drawing, which I think, well, my tips and how I did it a little bit and what I'm doing right now to continue that. So I hope you're all well, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.